inherent existence and inherent non-existence, as opposed to conventional existence or non-existence. For a thing to exist inherently is for it to exist in virtue of possessing an essence. For it to exist independently of other entities and independently of convention. For a thing to be inherently non-existent is for it to not exist in any sense at all, not even conventionally or dependently. With this in mind, we can see how Nagarjuna defends dependent arising while rejecting causation. 6. For neither an existent nor a non-existent thing is a condition appropriate. If a thing is non-existent, how could it have a condition? If a thing is already existent, what would a condition do? He notes here that if entities are conceived as inherently existent, they exist independently and, hence, need no conditions for their production. Indeed, they could not be produced if they exist in this way. On the other hand, if things exist in no way whatsoever, it follows trivially that they have no conditions. The following 3 verses make this point with regard to each of the 4 kinds of conditions. 7. When neither existence nor non-existence nor existent non-existence are established, how could one propose a productive cause? If there were one, it would be pointless. 8. An existent entity, mental episode, has no object. Since a mental episode is without an object, how could there be any percept condition? 9. Since things are not arisen, cessation is not acceptable. Therefore, an immediate condition is not reasonable. If something has ceased, how could it be a condition? In I.7, Nagarjuna is reasoning that since an inherently existent phenomenon is by definition independent, it could not have been produced by anything else. An inherently non-existent phenomenon certainly cannot be produced. If it were, it would be existent. An existent non-existent, for instance, something posited by a Menongian ontology existing in a logical space, though not in the actual world, cannot be produced since its actual production would contradict its non-existence and its production in some other way would contradict the inherent existence of the other sort posited for it. The argument in I.8 is a bit different and is directed more specifically at the special status of simultaneous supporting conditions, such as those posited in perception, as discussed above. Nagarjuna is making the following point: if we consider a particular moment of perception, the object of that perceptual episode no longer exists. This is so simply because of the mundane fact that the chain of events responsible for the arising of perceptual consciousness takes time. So the tree of which I am perceptually aware now is a tree that existed about 100 milliseconds ago, not one that exists now. The light took some time to reach my eye, the nerve impulses from the eye to the brain took some time, visual processing took still more time. So if the story about how the tree is the percept object condition of my perception according to which the tree exists simultaneously with the perception and exerts a causal power on my eye or visual consciousness were accepted, perception would be impossible. Moreover, the objects of many mental episodes are themselves non-existent, like the Golden Mountain. But non-existence can't be causally responsible for anything. Verse 9 contains 2 arguments. In the first half of the verse, Nagarjuna is offering a quick reductio on the idea that immediately preceding conditions can exist inherently. By definition, an immediately preceding condition is a momentary element of a causal chain. And, by definition, something that is inherently existent is independent, hence, it cannot arise depending on something else and, therefore, cannot cease to exist. But immediately preceding conditions must arise and cease. In the final line of the verse, Nagarjuna develops a related problem. Immediately preceding conditions must cease before their effect arises. If their existence and exertion of causal power is what explains the arising of the cause is then inexplicable. This argument is also used by Sextus Empiricus in Against the Logicians. What is important about this strand of the argument? Nagarjuna is drawing attention to the connection between a causal power view of causation and an essentialist view of phenomena on the one hand, and between a conditioned view of dependent arising and a conventional view of phenomena on the other. If one views phenomena as having and as emerging from causal powers, one views them as having essences and as being connected to the essences of other phenomena. This, Nagarjuna suggests, is ultimately incoherent since it forces one at the same time to assert the inherent existence of these things, in virtue of their essential identity, and to assert their dependence and productive character, in virtue of their causal history and power. But such dependence and relational character, he suggests, is incompatible with their inherent existence. If, on the other hand, one regards things as dependent merely on conditions, one regards them as without essence and without power. And to regard something as without essence and without power is to regard it as merely conventionally existent. And this is to regard it as existing dependently. This provides a coherent mundane understanding of phenomena as an alternative to the metaphysics of reification that Nagarjuna criticizes. Verse 10 is central in this discussion. 10. If things did not exist without essence. The phrase, when this exists so this will be, would not be acceptable. Nagarjuna is replying here to the causal realist's inference from the reality of causal powers to their embodiment in real entities whose essences include those powers. He turns the tables on the realist, arguing that it is precisely because there is no such reality to things and hence no entities to serve as the bearers of the causal powers, the realist wants to posit that the Buddhist formula expressing the truth of dependent arising can be asserted. It could not be asserted if in fact there were real entities. For if they were real in the sense important for the realist, they would be independent. So if the formula were interpreted in this context as pointing to any causal power, it would be false. It can only be interpreted, it would follow, as a formula expressing the regularity of nature. In the next 3 verses, 11 to 13, Nagarjuna anticipates and answers the causal realist's reply. 11. In the several or united conditions the effect cannot be found. How could something not in the conditions come from the conditions? Here the realist argues that the conclusion Nagarjuna draws from the unreality of causal power, the non-existence of things, where existence is read inherent existence, entails the falsity of the claim that things dependently arise. For if there are no things, surely nothing arises. This charge has a double edge. If the argument is successful, it not only shows that Nagarjuna's own position is vacuous, but that it contradicts one of the most fundamental tenets of Buddhist philosophy, that all phenomena are dependently arisen. Moreover, the opponent charges, on Nagarjuna's view, that the explanandum is not to be found potentially in the explanans, there